How's it going, everyone? Welcome. Elier Gonzalez here. Today, let's take a look now at the custom hook section, as well as the additional hooks or the additional tools in our toolbed on React, like data fetching and memoization, and why this thing is relevant. So to make a quick recap of how do I get here, so by first understand the history of React, why React is so useful, and that is because it allows to have one single place that describes the state or the information, and anytime that that state change, it's going to synchronize all the UI that have access to. Why this is relevant? Because writing your own user interface in the traditional way of developing web applications using the model view controller. Again, this is something that works back in the 80s, when you have now is everything integrated in one single place. Remember, this architecture is based on the client server. So you have now a server or an application that live on in someone else's computer, usually a web server, that anytime that you want to access to those documents or files, that computer is gonna serve that. And in order for us to look at them, we use now is a browser. Back in the old days, we use now is just terminal, right? To actually send some pins, some information to that, and then establish the communication. This communication that before the internet, the TCP, this protocol that wants to solve is how now different computers in a network, how they can now is, or how you as an administrator of that network, you can make sure that all of this package goes from one to another place. In other words, how this message goes from one place to another, passing through all of these different computers, right? And also consider that each one of those nodes in the network or computers, some of them might not be available, and others might not have the enough resource to to deal the workload. So what this protocol says, or what the internet, which is made by Vincent Cerf and among other tool folks that I don't remember, sorry by that. Sorry. Is that, hey, instead of focusing on how can we control the network, aka how can we now guarantee that a particular message go from one place to another, one computer to another, let's take a look is that at how that happen is at the closest devices as 101. All right. And then it come out with in the 90s, we need to have a way or a system, a protocol, and a standard that say, hey, whatever the architecture that machine has, all right, I don't care which hardware they use, right? But what I do need is that they implement now this particular open interconnection system, or the OC model, the open system interconnection. So now it guarantees that regardless how you configuring the hardware of your machines, right, and no matter which manufacturer you choose to go with, right, all of them, all of those OS is going to now run this way of how to exchange message across different architectures, right? So why I mention this? Well, because now, then when you need to, for example, access to some documents in any of these computer, right? you need to not only have access to in a secure way, but also sometimes you want to look that application or that document in a more user-friendly, human-friendly approach, right? So this is why we have now the browsers. And that's interesting because everything that has been developed is around the idea of the user. All right? And so as the year goes by, this MVC or this way of creating applications, web applications, applications that live in somebody else's computers, and you want to have access to it and then read some of that content or access or do something about that, right? So you need, or as the industry mature, the technology industry here, that start with simple websites to now more complex websites to provide more engaging interactivity and more useful features, right? So now companies, the top tech companies like particularly Facebook, right? They have now this particular problem of management. And this is something that is crucial because I know that it is so abstract to try to understand that the only way to know about that if you are exposed to that. So, for example, I am right now living in Argentina. I born in Venezuela, so people in Venezuela in the 90s is like they earn a lottery ticket. So you are rich, you don't know how you're rich, so because of that you don't know how to manage that, and then you're gonna firework that you're gonna burn that here and there, and well, it reached to a point that hey, at the end of the day, at least you need to have some sort of research to survive. One, and second is to then thrive, which is what happened with most of this Western civilization, Western cultures. I'm saying North America most of the time because Europe, that's a different case. But you know, in the U.S., right? Now they starting to deal or face or experience this first world problems, which is abundance problems. So now I have an abundance of water, food, now internet, women's and men's, you know. So I do now. So U.S. and now right now also a lot of these other states that now they are so they are now more so they develop a middle class, and this middle class is well somebody that actually are earning money based on the trade, based on the service and the thing that they sell, right? And now they are going to experience this kind of uh, scenarios, okay, of the abundance. So, but in any case, so now going back here, okay, so I mention is this because in how does it react fit in all of this? Pretty straightforward. Again, this kind of applications that now allows us to read this kind of content in the browser, so we can see that it not only is on machines but also on portable devices. All right. And I will think that the next frontier is not relevant to wearables. That's not the idea. The next frontier it will be now using is implants. Again, because now it's much more straightforward in order to access to content or to information, right? And at the end of the day, this is what is most valuable here. So now the challenge. Oh my god. So there's a very interesting series. I don't know if that's Netflix series, but the Cyberpunk, right? 2077. So, and also Deus Ex, that those folks, at least the Deus Ex game in the 90s and then on the 2000, right? They are tremendous game, by the way. I really enjoy about that. It's because they're describing something that we're going to experience and in a very fast pace right now in 2026. A lot of things will change in the next 4 years. It'll be tremendous, bro. Oh my god, it's gonna be tremendous a change. But in any case, I think that's the next frontier. All right. Receive now is updates through this neural interfaces. There is a very fucked up things on all of that because now this company that developing this they want at the end of the day control in any case. So well, that's the eternal fight, all right, between security and freedom. So if you now are, so if you give up your security, if you give up your freedom for security, you will either neither. If you're exchanging your security for freedom, you will neither get one of them, right? I think that's something that Franklin, Benjamin Franklin mentioned that, and that's now part of this better problems that the U.S. founding fathers they recognize and they write about this and what will be a plausible course of actions. But in any case, so here I am, right? So how now again React fit on all of this? Great, glad you asked. If you're not, no problem. uh, is that as we want to consume more content in this screens, whether it's on a laptop or a mobile, right? And we need to do something very specific, perhaps some bytes and some stuff, or to read about that. Uh, at the end of the day, we are now getting some feedback from it. Okay, so because now we, as the applications or and how these companies now needs to provide is more and more interactivity to their users, again because they want to increase the retention and the conversion, and that drive now is a drive which that serve is the market value, which is something that investor wants to invest here, and the cycle repeats, right? So and then you create now a ton of dependent folks on social media and so on and so forth. And at the end of the day, remember what matters as an individual is the outcome. Period. That's all. That's all. Just like that. So and now speaking of outcomes, speaking of what works, speaking of true, I'm actually looking at this course since thanks to the experience of Josh Kamua, a software engineer that previously worked at Khan Academy and then at Gatsby, right? He said, okay, in 2020 he created this course to actually make sense of how this tool works, right? React. And what is the problem that React now solve? Again, just to make a quick recap of this, the traditional way of writing web applications is by following is the model view controller. Okay, so because all of these are bounded, and if you are now have several pieces of information share across different of these model view controllers, or aka this view that is going to receive some data, do some treatments by pulling data from the database, and then iterate into the HTML markdown, and then send that to the browser. So for example, if a user is sign into their bank account, so that it can see now that data. So that's why now there is I really understand why the entire financial industry and also with the government actually use these techniques, and it makes a ton of sense because the challenge are about scalability. Is that how you can make now this in a way that is easy to maintain, easy to add or remove features, and scale that to not only millions of users but also billions of them, right? So React say, okay, now let's go to now across all of these different places of this MVC. So let's go to now centralize all of that into one single place known as the state. So we have now a common store, okay? And from there, let's now sync any time that this state change to whoever UI that triggers an state updates, right? So all of these different pieces of UI is a select or an input or any other UI that sync with this state. It makes a ton of sense to keep in sync. So that's great because after I look at that and how now you can create your own React and what React is doing at the end of the day by calling is this function known as the create elements, and you pass now the HTML tag or a custom HTML tag, right? Now when JavaScript call that function, when the JavaScript engine do that, it's going to now recreate is a object here, and that object described is the UI of that HTML. It's describing is the UI state, and then now React is going to mount that component into the DOM. So that's kind of the TLDR of that. I also went a little bit went deeper into that by looking at how you can create these components, what is the different in how we have what or why do we have GSX, for example. What is the benefit of using that? What is this difference between HTML and GSX? And what are the difference between templated languages? And also how you can now use this new way of writing user interface in your projects in a component like styles, and what now the web application will look like in this case. So you have now the index.html, or the index.js or TSX, and then the app.jx, and then now all the models that describe is the UI, right? And how this model will look like, which is at the end of the day, they are JavaScript functions, and what they need or how what is the anatomy of this component. So whether you receive props and children's, okay, what it means by that, and what are the things that you can do in this component. Most of the time is or rendering conditional elements, okay, using the if and that and so on and so forth. Whether it's using the if statement or an if expression or a ternary operator, or the rendering a list of elements, right? How now React actually do that behind the scenes, why do we need to pass is a key value to this, which is part of the React element anatomy, okay? And how can we add some CSS to our component? This is just to start the basics, from the basics. And then, okay, so how can we make this component react to user inputs? So again, traditionally the old way to do that, or the current way without using React, is or you attach an event listener, or you pass now or you call a function directly on the HTML element. But in the case of React, you don't do that. React is calling your functions, the function that you're passing to them, when that event is triggered. So I also look at how can we define some events and how we can pass on handlers to those event listener, okay? And now entering into one of the specific of React, which is, hey, at the end of the day, React wants to now centralize is the information in a state, which is a specific hook of React that allows us is to store a piece of information. The way how now that works in JavaScript is by using closures, and how by leveraging is the notion of the scope in JavaScript. So by understanding what a scope is and why JavaScript behave more like a compiled language when it analyzes the code, when it executes it, and what is the scope change, what is the different scope that we can have in JavaScript, like block and functions, and also the global objects, and depend where you're running your JavaScript code. You are going to you're gonna have access to a specific features of the global scope. In the case of the window, you're gonna have access to specific properties, or particularly web API. One of them is the DOM, and the other is, like, for example, navigator, event listeners, global event listeners as well. So, for example, mouse move or key up, key enter, key down, pointer events, and depend on. And there are other different environments. So I mentioned it's on the browser, but if you're running, for example, on the server, so now the global is quite different. And if you're using CommonJS or ES6 model as well. And the other is the workers, okay, web workers, that is now running. So it's kicking off a JavaScript instance that you can have access to the main thread, or the thread where now the UI is executed, okay? But you can communicate across different threads using a specific communication process. But again, and then, all right, now understand this, the life cycle of variables and how these things actually fits in all of this. In other words, what the function keyword does, and the var and let and counts, and how they behave normally in the global scope, and how now they behave is in a block scope or in looping iterations, like do or for, do while, and also in control flow logic like if statements. And what are the subtle things that can be useful for that? So once I understand that, right, which is a deeper knowledge of how now variables and values works in a particular scope, right? and how understanding the in and outs of this is important for the next step, which is understanding the principle of least exposure uh, in the closures, and how now closures, which is a very specific things of the functions, which is at the end of the day a scope. All right, this is now this is something that enable us to go to use is this model pattern that say, hey, this is now the piece of data and the behaviors that you can apply on this data. So why am I doing this, and why am I mention about the models and so on and so forth? Well, because this exploration of the JavaScript, particularly on the scope, right? And because with state, it allows us to remember this piece of information. Closure, which is a feature of the function, this is what allows us to remember over time, unless you refresh the page. So that's great, because with this knowledge that now it doesn't live on the abstract, it is practical, right? We can use now this hook that React create now is an internal representation to actually store this information and do some other stuff like re-rendering, which is part of the core loop. So anytime that you want to provide now interactivity to your components, and you want to remember a piece of information over time, now React say, hey, this is the tool, the useState, and anytime you want to update that piece of information, aka that state, now, well, let me now kick off this mechanism known as the core loop, right? It's going to detect which components trigger that state updates. It's going to call that component. At the end of the day, it is a function. Once it evaluates that function, the return statement, if that contains more React component, it will continue to call it. And in the meantime, it is recreating is this snapshot, this new version of the UI in the rendering process, right? And then once it knows the next snapshot, all right, it's going to spot the different React from the old one and the newly generated, and apply only the bare minimum DOM updates, which when the browser detects that, it's now spin up a updates, and you can see the UI that match that state, right? So this is a very convoluted stuff, but if you're able to describe that, it makes a lot of sense for you to know what the French toast we are doing here, right? Completely, absolutely. So the next thing is, all right, so now that I know this is what we need to do, and the difference between rendering and painting, and how you can now and how this mechanism work by and all of this state updates are asynchronous, mean you're gonna see those changes in the next tick. All right, also, well, how you can is now work with forms, and that's something that again, I want to make these things quick as possible. Okay, but with this input, which is another way of which is another job that we as front-end developers do a lot of the time, rendering a list of elements and a form to collect data from the users. So if you want to do that using this data binding pattern, we use now a use effect, and depend of the specific inputs, most of the time those are now very specific to interact with without React. But with React, now it provides now a patterns, so we can detect those elements and collect that data as it is, right? So far so good, because after that I went through knowing how to render dynamically collections of elements, how we can dynamically generate is all of these unique IDs, like, hey, uh, unique ID for rendering a list, okay, using the crypto.random and so on and so forth, and how you can describe now complex state of data in your React applications using now objects, and why we need to return is a new state of that. This is speaking now in terms of how now we store objects or information at low level in the main memory, right? And this is a very interesting journey. Again, I'm going to make this very quickly. I'm going to make this quick. So when a program, so again, let's maintain the north, and that is, why do we even care? What is this immutability? Okay, and why this snapshot is relevant here? Two things, two questions. Okay, now, well, it turns out that any time that a program, which is a portable binary executable code that live on your disk, is mounted in the main memory and executed by the CPU, and do you know who is doing that? The operating system. So when they do that, right? Now it creates a process, and a process is something expensive to create, because you can think of this like a container, a resource container, right? So pretty much like when you go out and look at an office and you want to create your own business there, you say, hey, this is like a good deal for me, right? So you are now allocating and selecting a specific a place, right? A container of resource, right? So this container here, which or the OS is now choosing a specific amount of memory that you can consume, right? It can increase, but for the sake of example, let's gonna see a fixed amount of resource, right? All of those now are being used by that process, right? You can create other process to also use now that address, memory address, okay? And one misbehaving process won't compromise other. Won't compromise other process. So if you're in a building, if you think of this like in a building, if you have an office and that office suddenly set on fire, all right, well, you can now turn it off, but that fire wouldn't spread at a certain point. That fire would not spread to other offices, okay? Again, with a lot of quotes, but in the computer, this is a well defined, and this is because this is a container. You will not going to get out of this. You will stay there. You can using another alternative, but most of the time you stay there. So why am I mentioning this? Because any time that now we create an object in JavaScript, the JavaScript engines now is going to interact with the environment, in our case the browsers, to reserve a space in memory. And who handles that? The OS. Right? So this handling, all right, or this reservation, the space in memory, what you're doing is to assign is an address memory to that variable. So that variable, what it's going to hold is a reference to where the actual value live in memory, right? So why this is important? Well, because anytime that you now recreate a new state or a new snapshot of your application, React, what it's doing is now is creating is a new piece of information in a different place, right? Because at the end of the day, you are passing is a new state. So uh, that is quite interesting and revealing in terms of understanding why we do the thing that we do, and what this hook is doing behind the scenes, and we're gonna see why that is relevant next. And it turns out that, well, um, let's um, let's now look at how you where this state live matters in your applications. Since it's known as the state or the lifting the state up, right? So choosing where your piece of information will live in your application, and since most of the time when we decide that, uh, depend of what kind of information we want to store, whether it's app level or by component, okay, uh, this is when now other tools like Redux kicks in, okay. Depend on the kind of product that you're building, whether it's a landing page or a blog that doesn't require too much state, global state, or a heavy client applications like some games, for example, or uh, some back office applications where now the state, the source of truth, live is on a database. You need to interact with that and store that in a secure way and put some guardrails and guards and some Navy SEALs around that, and you can hire some people from the Area 51 to make that even more secure, and so on and so forth. You're starting to you get the idea, right? So, well, it turns out that as I look at each one of those use cases, uh, so on the first one, the landing page, you don't actually need to have some app level applications like Redux, but for client side applications, yes, that makes a lot of sense. Or for application that needs to keep track of a huge object, all right. So for example, this is true for airlines companies or real estate companies, or for any or banking applications as well, you know. Um, and the other is for back office applications. So the problem here is now this the source of truth that live on the database. Okay, we need to first fetch the right data at the right time and validate somehow that the data that we have in our application doesn't grow stale, and that we somehow catch that request response, so we don't hammer in the API a lot of the time. So we don't hammer in our API, and um, we need to somehow predict how the requests will be resolved. Why is that? As a way to reduce the amount of requests and keep up the data updated, and also is the paginations. So these are now problems related to network, right? This is network related issues, and this is something that we're gonna see that in today's video, all right? But I just want to mention those pretty quickly, right? Yeah, I do have standing desk. I really love that. A regulable standing desk. I really love that. Yep, yep, yep. And well, um, it turns out that this kind of problem, which is what we're gonna see that later on in today's video, are network-related problems. So for them, you have now specific tools like Apollo from GraphQL or SWC from Next, which is a framework around that, or React 10 Stack. Uh, so that's uh, that summarized is at least this the second models, right? When we look at and discuss about that, and now finally here, by exploring is that the React, these additional tools that React gave us to solve specific problems. Why is that? Because without it, we have to reuse its components all over the place. And this is when you look now applications that have several of those components that they don't have any UI specific stuff. They just only handle is some UI logic, all right, or some text related logic. So that's why now the React team say, hey, well, let's now introduce this hook, right? So there are several of them. I mentioned just the most common one. So for example, like the use the use ID. When you want to React have a global identifier, right? This is useful for binding your label to your input, usually in a form, right? If you have now several of those forms, or if you're creating is a onboarding process, then you somehow want to keep track of that globally. So React now in these hooks allow us to do that. So good, so far so good. The other is these hooks now follow a rules. I'm not going to dive deep into the details. You can take a look at the docs. But it turns out that it is about the always put your React hook at the top of your component and make sure to use that on your React component, except for custom hooks. So I also look at the use ref. How can we use it? What is the okay? So what's the deal with this? Holding is DOM elements. So when we need to interact with them, for example, audio and video or canvas, we can do that in that particular component. Okay, so we don't have to read that element over and over and over. So we just only read that once, and we hold that reference. So we save now a lookup operation. Then is the use effect. So anytime that you need to synchronize your source of truth with other external systems with your React applications, this is the place when we can now run this. So for example, global events or timers or reading the local and writing, so reading and writing the local variables or fetching data from a server. So hooks now, or the effect, allows to run this, and it has a particular mechanism that it runs after every render. So yeah, let me do something quickly here. Oh, I'll be right back. And we are back. All right. Yeah, we are here where we are. Sorry. Where we are is looking now at the custom hook, particularly anytime that you need to synchronize your source of truth with an external system, or vice versa. Okay, whether it's that source of truth live outside of your React app or inside of that, and you somehow need to synchronize with it. So React give us this effect that I look at how to do that. First, the work, the mechanism. All right, it kick off after every renders. If you don't pass any argument in the second parameter, but if you do pass, it accept is now an array of dependency. So this will now trigger is the callback function you pass to this effect, okay? And whenever that array of dependency change, whenever those state change, it will trigger that function. So I saw that how to do that in state, and also how you can now synchronize a React app state with, for example, the document title, all right? Or, for example, for more convenient use cases, like mouse events or pointer events or resize events, or using now the observer API, the interception observer API. And when you do this, all right, as I look at the effect rules, which is something that you're gonna see that when that pop-ups, and sometimes I see people using so comment that lines, but what they're doing is just they just shooting their foot because they are avoiding is an unavoidable bug in their app. And also some other exercise and when to do that, right? That kind of stuff. In the part of the life cycle of this particularly hooks. Now, I also look at, because we need to synchronize with external system, we also need to somehow unsubscribe to them. So this is why we look at the cleanup function and getting into the weeds of what this effect is doing is by any time that you pass now a function and you return a function, which is just a clever way of React to know when to trigger this effect and when to trigger the cleanup function. So it follows now particularly a pipeline where on the initial screen, or when your component mounted, it will call your effect first. And when your components now, or when the state updates, when there is an state update, it will trigger a, oh my god. So on the initial, so when the component is mounted, it will run your effect. When there is an state update, it will run the cleanup function first, and then the effect, right? And when this component is unmounted, it say, okay, now let me run the cleanup function. So because there is a lot of bugs, and also see how can I just unsubscribe to this, for example, pointer events or key events, or the resize object, or the observer, intersection observer API. And since on React 19 we have this strict mode which enhance some functionality in React to avoid some common gotchas. One of them is the use effect hook, right? So uh, it what it does in development is to run your function for run your so run your effect first, then the cleanup, and then the effect again. This is just to make sure that you follow is part of this the convention of this hook, right? So that's what it is. That's what this strict mode is doing. As I look at this, all right, and also add some additional benefits. But we're gonna see that later on in throughout this course. Now, here is the custom hook. Okay, again, because once now you the idea of or the benefit of using this is you can now is abstract React logic here in one single JavaScript function that you can put on a file, all right? And now this will allow you to describe specific behavior in your application. That is great, bro. These two things, and also I look at an exercise of how you can abstract that into your own custom hook. And this has been so powerful that, for example, on the authentication, like use Okta, right? So they say, I'm going to put all of this piece of information in this function, this JavaScript function, and then I'm going to expose is not only is the state, and among other functionalities. So let's take a look at this. React Okta here, right? So Okta is just, so they say is the OIDC, which is a fancy way to say the OpenID and the centralized authentication protocol, aka is to identify who is getting access to, right? That's it. That's it. That's it. And why am I mentioning this? Well, because this is something that you might look if you work for a big company, when the Okta is just the service that is using now is protocols. So Okta here, you can see this is a corporation here. Okta secures AI and every other identity from machine to human. Right? But again, Okta here, sign in with Okta Fastpace and OAuth 0. This is to secure your identities and introducing OAuth for AI agents. Yeah. Gartner has recognized Okta as a leader in the 2025 Magic Quadrants for access management. That's what it is. And this access management company, it used one of the protocols, the standard protocol, industry standard protocol, known as the OAuth and the OICD. Take a look at this. Let me see. Let me show you this. Well, the OAuth and the yeah, the OAuth, right? Let me see if you can take a look at this. Yeah, the OAuth and the ID, something that you look at this. Let me see if is there. Oh, come on, for real? This one, OIDC, open and open ID, right? Or open ID decentralized, right? So, but in any case, why am I looking at this? Because this is a good example of how a custom hook is being used in the first place. So If I dig in here, not on the Octa here, is especially here on the Octa React SDK. So it exposes several of helpful link, several. It actually tells you how to include that, creating React router routes with class-based components. Okay. Yeah, you're using is now React router DOM, so on and so forth. You know, you got all of these things, but I do want to show you is security, or is this one reference here, right? So you get is the octa auth or restore original URI and so on and so forth. So again, this is part secure route, right? Login callback with octa auth and use octa auth, all right? But you get the idea, right? You get the idea here. Yep, you get the idea. So this is the octa, all right? Specific custom hook for keep track of the authorization and authentication of your application, the user application. So here's the use mouse position, right? I show this particular exercise. Also the use on screen to see if I am on the screen or not. If this element is on the screen, by using is the interception observer API, like this, right? And now they use toggle here, which is another custom hook. All right. Use this on screen. That to me is quite interesting. Okay, let's get into this. Okay. If you're curious how magnetic lines effect works on my blog, I did a walk through on some of the basic concepts on the front end. Horse holiday, snow tackler.
Very slick transition. I'm gonna remove my jingly hat.
That's life again. That's him. He so many
yeah.
things.
Okay. So this is my blog, right? I have my little 3D mascot, and behind my 3D mascot, I have this line art that kind of follows your cursor. And I've gotten a bunch of questions about how this is built. My very ambitious goal for the next 16 minutes now is to show you at least like something similar to this. And we may not get all the way there, but hopefully it will at least be valuable. In my practice runs, I realize that it does take, there's like a lot of little things in here that I don't want to assume too much experience, but yeah. This is where we're starting, right? Okay, no fancy effects. We have this kind of black rectangle, which I just added so we can see the kind of confines of this thing. And now let me make this slightly less enormous. It is built with React, and I'm using some React here, but we're not gonna talk about the React side. Essentially, the important thing to note is I have this generative arc component. I know that I want to have 8 rows and 16 columns, right? That's in terms of.
So you define this as in a fixed dimension.
This way and 8 lines this way. I'm giving it a fixed size of 200 by 400. And now this part here, this is the magic that I'm going to completely hand wave over. Essentially, this gives me an automatically updating position for where my mouse is. So based on the top left corner being 0, 0, it's whenever I move the mouse. Actually, I can just show you that.
Okay.
I'll add a console log mouse position, and then on my local host, as I move around, right, if we keep our eye on the console, it just tells me where the mouse is. So I'm not doing like a request animation frame loop. I'm just treating the mouse position as the state, and then everything redraws whenever the state changes. Cool. So that's one piece of useful information. I also have this use canvas hook, that's one piece of position as the state. And then so I'm not doing like a request animation frame loop. I'm just treating the mouse position as the state,
Okay, I'm just triggering the mouse position.
And then everything redraws whenever the state changes.
Cool.
So that's one piece of useful information. I also have this use canvas hook, which sets up the canvas. There's like weird stuff you have to do where if you're on a retina display, you have to crank up the actual size because there's twice as many pixels. So this like does all of that for me.
Okay.
The interesting bit is this draw function, right? This is where all of this stuff is going to happen. Where every time this component
From every time this component render, you're gonna call that function and draw that. And oh my
I'm
god.
going to call this draw function and give it all the information I have in the world. And then finally, I just render the actual canvas.
Cool.
In this draw function, right now I'm just clearing it so that we have a nice blank slate on every frame. And I have stuff written here. Like this is where we're going to do some stuff. So let's start a little bit with like a modest goal of just drawing like a circle somewhere over here.
Okay.
So it would be nice in Canvas if there was like a context.circle method, but there isn't. Instead we have arc. And arc is actually a little bit better because you can draw like part of a circle. Like you can say, I want like a 90-degree slice of a circle.
Okay.
We need to give it the X position. So the center position in the X axis. So let's just say 50. We need the Y position. Well, let's say 25. We need a radius, let's say 50. And then I need the actual angles, right? So you might think going from 0 to 360 degrees would work, but nothing can be so simple. It's in radians rather than degrees, so we have to do 2 times math.pi. Oh, and I actually have to dot fill, right? So we've like traced the path here. By the way, this begin path and close path. I don't actually know if it's necessary when you're just doing a single thing like this, but it's muscle memory for me at this point. And when I do that, I have a circle kind of drawn in the top corner. I should say, like the reason it was huge there for a second, there's like a bug with my code where when it hot reloads, it gets twice as big. And that happens like every time. It's only in development because there is no hot reloading in production. So I haven't dedicated the time to figuring it out. But you'll notice whenever I save, like this circle just gets, I guess I have to change something.
That's funny.
The circle just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. Well, when it wants to, maybe not on demand. But okay, so that's all well and good, but I don't want to do this once, right? I have these number of rows and number of calls, and I want to go through and add a circle in every position. So let's add a for loop. And it's common in like things I've seen where you use like I for this, like you'll say I equals 0. I don't like I, so I'm going to say, let's do row index. While row index is less than num rows, row trying to move
Yeah,
here.
there's that hot reload thing. That's so funny.
0 to mid. And I'm going to do the same thing for my rows.
And then it's going to now is
Row index,
on each one of this
rows,
position.
and height. And then when I change this to X and this to Y, I'm also going to pick like a smaller number for radius because 50 is kind of big. And what we see is I have a grid of dots. There is this kind of issue where it starts literally in the top left corner, so the very first row and column of dots are being trimmed. And what I would have to do to fix this is push them over by half the width of a column and row, and I'm too lazy to do that. I don't have the patience for that right now.
Oh, good.
So I'm just gonna like kind of arbitrarily add a number, just because trying to move quickly
Yeah,
here.
there's that hot reload thing. That's so funny.
It always is a little bit alarming when I forget that it does that, and it just
no.
I think I've done something terrible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
Okay, so I have my grid of dots, and
Holy moly! And then it's going
Just
to.
kind of like it's just one of those things where you go, wee, and you just play with for like 10 minutes, and it's a lot of fun. Nice. So now we just need to change the max and min of this, right?
yeah, I mean, maybe we don't want it to be like that big, so maybe do like 10 instead
Sorry,
of.
not trying to give you notes on how to make your effect. Now you need to make it blue, right?
And actually, I wish we had a bit more time because it's fun to like play with this. Like I can change the range I care about, right? If I make it so I only care about 20, then I have this really kind of tight effect. Whereas if I make it 200, I have this much kind of larger effect. So there's all kinds of like. Actually, I wish we could pull up Chris's like knobs thing so we could like play with the actual the values in real time without having to jump to the code. But
Have you seen that before? I never seen
no,
that.
I mean I
library.
had seen dat.gui all the years ago.
I've seen that GUI everywhere, but not.
Yeah.
I've never seen knobs. It seems really nice, so I'm excited to play with that.
It's really cool, yeah.
Yeah, Josh, this was great. Thank you so much. As a bunch of people in the chat said, they love your site. Your blog is another one. I think I've mentioned a few great blogs. And Dave Rupert kicked us off today by kind of like going through and saying like everyone has a great blog. Cassidy, it happened.
Hello. It happened?
It happened.
Wow. That's amazing. I have the chat over here on the side, and so I'm watching
Perfect.
people go like, "Oh, we did it!" Stuff.
We
Yay!
did it.
That's so exciting.
We did it, chat. Oh.
So
physical pain. That's what it is. Alex causes Cassidy physical pain. Wouldn't be the first time.
I've set value because we need to read for this reason.
Okay, that's interesting. That's interesting. That's interesting. But in any case, that was a very interesting things to look at how this particular effect is being run. That is mind bending here. And how to use the mouse positions for that specific stuff. And then the use is on screen using the intersection observer. So what it do is just to abstract that logic, right? And here I'm gonna say, hey, is this false or is this true, right? I do want to keep track some piece of information here, right? By say is react.state here. Oh my god, is useState. That's right. Initially wants to set that to false, right? And store that piece of information. It has a reference of that data in some things like we're gonna call is on screen, right? And the set for this set is on screen, right? So good. So far so good. And I'm gonna use now another React hook by saying, hey, I do in this time use an effect that this is a function that I wanna kick off after a render, particularly on the first time, okay, where I'm going to now is listen to, so create this intersection observer, which is, hey browser, I need you to create, I need you to observe this object, or I need you to observe this DOM element, and any time that you intersect this, this is the function that I want you to do. So how to do this? Well, pretty straightforward. We create now a new object, the intersection observer. Okay, this spec is now to pass a function to verify is what are the or this is a function that the intersection observer is gonna trigger, so we can have access to by calling here into the entries, okay? And on each one of those entries, right? I do think no. In each one of those entries, no. Okay. Exactly. And each one of those entries, okay, I do want is to, from the entries, get only one, all right, for all of those strings of entries, of strings of events that the browser is firing up for us. I want to get is only one of them and see if that entry, okay, now the method is intersecting, I think it is called, right, is intersecting will be true or not. And because this will give us is the read-only value, we can use the set function to actually synchronize our React application with that, right? So far, so goddamn good, right? So pretty much this is it. Okay, but what I do wanna, but then I need to somehow hold that reference of that behavior in a variable. Why is that? Let's gonna call this observer, okay? Because I do want us to kick off the process. I wanna now, after I create the object, I wanna say, hey, now browser, start listening. Using is this observer, the what is the method? Observer dot observe. Okay. However, it say, hey, but what am I going to observe, right? And here you say, all right, so I need to somehow get that element, right? So pass me that element, okay? And I am expecting to get is now this element. But now React say, okay, I'm going to provide you this element, but this element I need to know which the current snapshot of that. I need to keep track of that state so I can provide you with the new one. So in our case, we need to add this element. Do this. It say, hey, cannot destructure property elements undefined as undefined. Yeah, because I didn't actually pass or enable that here, right? So several students have tried to solve this by passing the download directly, like this. All right. Curiously, this seemingly innocuous change break everything. Ah, that's interesting. Okay. Exactly. Exactly. Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay, but because that element that I want to pass down here is somehow breaking that, so we're gonna say, hey, document query selector in this case is this on the first time, which is the header. All right. It's a cannot destruction property element. That's right, because I need to pass this as an object and say element here, right? And then it say, hey, the observer that server, Jesus, okay. The element observe is that it say, hey, fail to execute observe on intersection observer. Okay, on intersection observer. And now it's interesting, it's like crashing. So yeah, it's like could not consume error. An error of app occur. An error on app occur. Consider adding an error boundary to your tree to customize the error handling. But okay, that's right. Letting this go, we're gonna give exactly why this doesn't work. Okay. So yeah, in other words, that's right. So I do want to pass now the element, but it say no, you shouldn't pass that element as it is. You indeed need to give me is that reference, right? Say ref, and here I'm gonna call is the um, red box ref, okay, to make sure what this thing is doing. So then I want to call is the react dot use ref, hold that reference here, right? And then I do want to pass now this here. So let me make this things up, right? Or I can do this as well. And now attach that ref here to be executed only once, right? So read that only once. Cannot access redbox before initialize, so we need to put this at the top. And now it's saying, hey, intersection observer, it failed. If I reload this, it say, hey, failed to execute observe on intersection observer. Parameter 1 is not a type of element. On what? Oh, here. Oh, okay, so if I pass, oh, so I need to hold that as a reference and pass this current, right? Is undefined. That's interesting. That's interesting. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. Is use here. I'm calling is a use ref here. I am passing now the rest box here. This will of course run once. If I pass the current here, it of course wouldn't work, right? Because elements of undefined as it is undefined. But even though if I want to pass, oh, because silly me, I need to pass is this as element and say now this one, right? And pass that reference. So now this will work. All right. So because after the use effect, I want to also run now a cleanup function, okay, which is, hey, after this, whatever component use this, after you unmount that, I want to now disconnect that observer, disconnect, right? So stop listening to that, and of course return me now the value in there is on screen here, right? So now in my component I can do is access to that, and it didn't trigger that. That's quite interesting. And passing is this reference to that. Is making use of this on the element of current, where I'm holding that element. Okay. Exactly. I'm holding that element, right? And because this is now getting triggered when element change. Okay, so if I reload this, Now it fires that up. So in theory, it's supposed to trigger that, but it didn't. Okay. So no problem. So another thing we can do is, or whether I receive that and pass now the current, right? This doesn't work as well. So if I pass now is just the hook here, right? Without calling that element, right? I'm just calling is this red box element. I say element here to element dot current. All right, is not working. That's interesting. So somehow this is not getting called. It's getting called only once, but it's not attached to that. You know, entry dot is intersecting. God damn it. Okay, it's intersecting. Now it works. Okay, so now it worked as expected. Okay, good. Good. Awesome. And the others use toggle here. So that'll be all for this video. Yeah, take care. Bye bye.